second portion of the book of Exodus, the portion of Vaeschanan, is a very important portion in the Torah because it reiterates some of the most important principles of Judaism. And certainly, if you look at the Kabbalah, or the way Kabbalah was elaborated within the Chasidic philosophy, the most important verses appear in this parsha. So, therefore, this is the perfect week. Excuse me. This is the perfect week to think about some of the principles of the Kabbalistic teachings and the Hasidic teachings, and that's what we're engaged in right now. We're also going to look a little bit at Rashi, because one principle that the Rebbe taught was that Rashi, in addition to Rashi having a simple meaning, Rashi also alludes to Kabbalistic concepts, and we're going to look at the same verse, how Rashi explains it and how Rambam Maimonides explains it, and we'll see the difference because of the different perspectives within Judaism. Okay, so that's introduction number one. So what are the concepts that the Parsha discusses that are so important to Judaism? So first of all, you have that Moshe repeats and reiterates the Ten Commandments. So Moshe is in Mishnah Torah, in Deuteronomy, Moshe is teaching and retelling the stories that happened in the past 40 years. And of course, a very important story is the story of the God revealing himself to the Jewish people and giving us the Ten Commandments. So Moshe repeats the Ten Commandments. In addition to repeating the Ten Commandments, Moshe also has this whole beautiful lead up to the Ten Commandments and sort of framing this story and telling the people how unparalleled and how amazing that experience is. And in fact, is a commandment to remember the Exodus every single day. That's what he says. Moshe says in this week's Parsha. Zachor, you have to remember the day that you stood before God at Horeb, which is another name for Sinai. And so this is a very important principle in Judaism. There's also the Shema, which becomes part of the prayer, but it's in the Torah, so I guess it's the earliest prayer in the prayer book, is the Shema. Comes back originates in Moshe's words to the Jewish people in this week's Parsha. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, which is the basic declaration of monotheism within Judaism, and it becomes the most important prayer. People say it twice a day, and people say it before their passing. Obviously, one of the most important verses, or maybe the most important verse in Judaism. So that is all very important and all very important concepts. Maybe there's not that much drama in this week's Parsha, but philosophically, there's a tremendous amount. Now, the verse we're going to think about is a verse that Moshe describes in the lead up to the story of the Ten Commandments. And Moshe is describing and telling the people, often people have, or individually or nationally, people had an experience, but they don't realize that it's unique. They don't realize how unique it is that they merited this experience. So Moshe wants to make sure not only that we remember the actual story of the revelation at Sinai, but also we want to make sure that people understand how unique it is. And Moshe therefore describes and dramatizes, so to speak, the events of Sinai. So there is a verse, going off topic a little bit for a moment. There is a verse, chapter 4, verse 32. Inquire now about the early years that preceded you, from the day that God created Adam on earth, and from one end of heavens to the other end of heavens. Did anything ever happen comparable to this great event? Or did anyone ever hear of such a thing? What's the great event that Moshe is declaring? The great event is the next verse. Did any people ever hear God's voice speaking from within the fire, as you heard, and survived? So there's so did any other nation ever hear God? And that's what we have unique about the giving of the Torah, about our story. What's unique about our story is that all other religions have the same story. They say that God appeared to one person or at most a small group of people. And the story of Judaism is unique because it's the only story where you hear that not only did God appear to Moshe, that, okay, every religion makes that claim, but here we have a claim that God appeared to hundreds of thousands of people. And that claim, if you think about it, is very hard to, the reason why other religions didn't copy this claim is because it's very hard to make a claim like that God spoke to hundreds of thousands of people and they pass it on to their children, because somebody's going to say, no, I wasn't there. So there was a reason why people took a lot from Judaism, but nobody copied the claim that there was mass revelation, because it's very difficult to get a claim like that off the ground. So one way of reading the verse 32 is Moshe says two things. He says, did anything ever happen comparable to this event? Did anybody else experience at Sinai? Did any other nation experience a mass revelation to hundreds of thousands of people? That's one question. And then there's another question. Or did anyone ever hear of such a thing? Literally, hanishma kamo. Was this heard? Meaning to say, according to some opinions, what Moshe is saying not only didn't happen anywhere, but nobody even makes the claim that it happened. Why? You can't make a claim like this. You can convince me that you had a dream last night, but you can't convince me that we had a dream last night. That's very difficult to do. So the point here is this is just one verse where Moshe is highlighting the unique events of the giving of the Torah. So unique, it didn't happen to anybody else. So unique that nobody even makes a claim to the events of Sinai. Okay, fine. That's just one verse, but there are other verses. And then we come to an interesting verse. Verse 35. Chapter 4, verse 35. You have been shown to know. You have been shown that you might know that Hashem is God, the Lord is God. There is no other than him. There is none other than him. The Chumash I'm using is, they don't like that verse because there's nothing other than God. How could you say that? So they write, there's no power other than him. But that's not what the verse says. The verse says, you should know Hashem hu Elokim, the Lord is God. There is nothing other than him. Now, this is an interesting verse. We actually say it a few times a year. We say it
Rabbi, you're breaking up.
Simchas Torah, we make a big deal. If you will see in a moment that Moshe is using this verse to describe the giving of the Torah. In other words, at Sinai, you have been shown to know. Every time we take out the Torah scroll from the Ark and we read the Torah, in a sense, it's a miniature Sinai. In a sense, it's the revelation of the divine word. So it's fascinating that the rabbis instituted that before we read the Torah, we evoke the verse that describes the giving of the Torah, originally the great revelation at Sinai, where everybody came to see that the Lord is God and there's none other than he. So that's just interesting anecdote, an interesting detail. So every time we open before we open the ark, we say, "Vayiven Ha'aron," the verses that the Torah uses to describe the ark traveling in the desert. But before we say those verses, we say other verses. We say this verse, "Ata harei saladas," you have been shown to know the Lord is God. There is nothing other than he. Ein od milvado, there is nothing else other than he. Okay. So that's just interesting that we try to recreate that verse in our consciousness when we read the Torah. Okay, fine. Now, what does this verse say? This verse says that the Lord is God, there's none other than he. Now, this is a verse that the Kabbalists love and Chasidic philosophy loves. Why? Because what does it mean there's nothing other than he? So the conventional interpretation is, how do you say there's nothing other than he? I exist, I see a world, I see a universe, I see a cosmos, there's so much going on here. How could you say there's nothing other than he, which is what the verse says? So what it means is there's no other God, right? And the way my English Chumash translates it, there's no other power. Wonderful. That's not bad. There's one God, no other gods. This is not a controversial statement. But the Kabbalists read this verse and they read it literally. You know what this verse says? This verse says that at Sinai, you have been shown to know that the Lord is God. There's nothing else aside for him. There's nothing else aside for him. Oh, what do you mean there's nothing else aside for him? So this creates a There's nothing else aside for him. What about creation? So here, the Chasidic interpretation explains, or the Kabbalistic interpretation explains, that of course other things exist, but other things are insignificant compared to God's essence. In other words, if God's essence is present, then everything else loses significance, because we are being created from God every moment. God creates us every moment. We don't have any independent existence. So if you would see the presence of God that creates us and continues to recreate the creation every moment, then the creation itself loses significance. So in that sense, Einod Milvada, it's true to say there's nothing else beside him. What about we? We're insignificant. Not that we're not here. Of course we're here. Because the world of creation is not an illusion. The Torah says God created a world. And if we're just an illusion, then the things we do are not significant. We're not saying we don't exist. We're saying compared to God's essence, we don't exist. Einod Milvada. There's nothing else. We don't have any significant existence aside for him. And this is something that Hasidic literature spends many, many pages, hundreds of pages, maybe thousands of pages, trying to explain this concept and trying to feel the idea that when a person meditates and thinks about the greatness of God, a person can attain that understanding and that perspective, that nothing in this world is significant except for the presence of God, and there's nothing else other than God. And in a sense, that's also what we're trying to do when we say the Shema. We cover our eyes and we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, God is one. What does God is one mean? So again, the conventional interpretation is God is one. There's only one God. There are no other gods. But the Hasidic interpretation is no, God is one. There's one existence, which is God. Everything else is not independent. It's not separate. It can't be counted as something two. It can't be counted as two because it's completely dependent on the energy of God to create it every moment. So in that sense, God is one. Now, we understand, we discussed this many times, especially on the Fridays, we understand that this perspective is not natural to us. That's not the natural perspective. So we understand that's the divine perspective. So therefore, after Moshe says those words, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is our what? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And then Moshe immediately goes, and you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Why should I give away my heart and soul for God, or even my might? The Talmud says your might means your money, right? You should give up your life for God if you're necessary. You should give up your money for God if necessary. Why would I give everything up? Only because I meditated on the first verse, which says God is one. If God is one, there's nothing else significant. So there's nothing else significant in this world. I'll give everything up for God. But the problem is that Moshe jumps from the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, to you shall love the Lord your God. We don't do that. We insert another verse that does not come from the Torah. What do we say? We make a phrase. It says, Baruch Shem, blessed is the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. Whoa, how did that verse get in there? So here, you have the story in the Talmud that this is a conversation between Jacob and his sons. We're not going to get into that right now. From the Hasidic perspective, the second verse is our perspective. Our perspective is that God has a kingdom. A kingdom means there is a universe, and there is a world, and there's a kingdom with all the details that go along with the kingdom. And we acknowledge that the kingdom is God's kingdom. In other words, God creates this wonderful kingdom. But in some sense, second sentence of the Shema is disagreeing with the first sentence of the Shema. The first sentence of the Shema says, there's no kingdom, there's only Hashem Echad, God is one. The second sentence of the Shema says, or the sentence we insert, is we insist, we say, no, there is a kingdom. God, blessed is the name of the glory of his kingdom. We thank God because his name, his energy creates the kingdom. Okay, but that's a contradiction. In other words, it's not that God is one, but there's also, but the second phrase is God creates the kingdom. Says the Kabbalah, going back to the Zohar. The first verse is God's perspective. The second verse is our perspective. We mentioned this in the past. And therefore, we have a disagreement, so to speak. There's two perspectives. And it's important that each perspective understands that there's another perspective. And that's why for a moment we close our eyes, forget about our perspective, say God, understand God's perspective. The Lord is one. There's nothing else that's significant. And then we open up our eyes and say, no, there are other things significant. There is a world we feel ourselves. Okay, we get our energy from God. So therefore, we thank God for giving us life. That's our perspective. That's not God's perspective. I think we discussed this at length last week. That's not why I brought you here Friday morning to tell you this. This you already know. This is old stuff. not old stuff. Shema says, these words that I command you today, says Rashi, every day, quotes the Talmud, every day it's like God commands you today. Every day it has to be like new. In other words, why do we have to get up every day and say the Shema twice, right? The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And it's not enough that you said it yesterday, you have to say it today. It's not enough that you say it in the morning, you also have to say it in the afternoon. Why do you have to keep telling that to yourself? Don't you know it's true? If it's true, say it once, and that's it. When you're 13 at your bar mitzvah, make a declaration. I believe in the one God, and that's it. Leave me alone. So the reason why you have to keep declaring this is because this thing is the most counterintuitive thing you could say. This thing is so contradictory to everything that we sense that it's not enough to say it when you're 13. You have to say it every day because you have to realize that this is a truth that we don't necessarily experience. We have to try to experience at least some of it. Which experience? That nothing else is significant except for God. For me, I'm holding a cup of coffee, very significant. I didn't have it yesterday because of the fast day. Trust me, it wasn't a good day. So for me, there are other things that are significant. But I have to understand that I have to tell myself the truth. The truth is, from God's perspective, is only Hashem is echad, Hashem is one. Okay, fine. That's by way of introduction. Now, we could start studying the Chasidic discourse for this morning. So I'm happy that the introduction did not take more than half the class, so that's good. That's a plus. That's very good. If you have any questions on the introduction, you could mention it now. I'm not sure I can answer the questions. Everything I said here is counter to our senses. So I would expect some protests. If you're not going to protest, I'll protest. But if anybody wants to make a comment, go ahead. Otherwise, we move forward. Okay, the first thing we want to talk about is, let's read Rashi. We're gonna focus on this verse that we said. The Lord is our Lord. You have been shown to know that God, that Hashem Elohim, the Lord is one. There's no power other than He, or there's nothing other than He. So let's read. That's the verse. I'm going to read the Rashi a little bit, and then we'll try to see how, according to the Chasidic commentary, Rashi has many secrets of the Torah embedded within this little Rashi here. And the first thing, I'll just read the Rashi. Rashi to verse 35. You have been shown. Har eta, according to Targum Onkelos, means you were shown. Meaning, there's a difference between you saw and you have been shown. And we're going to elaborate upon that difference, hopefully. So Rashi says, first thing, we have to translate the word. You have been shown to know. Ata haresa, you have been shown. And now Rashi clarifies what that means. Says Rashi, when the Holy One, blessed be He, gave the Torah, He lay open for them the seven heavens. And just as He split open the upper spheres, so too He split the lower spheres. And thus they saw that He is the only one. It is therefore stated, you have been shown that you might know. Okay, the English translation here is not perfect. It says, just like He opened for them the seven heavens, so too, He lay open for them the seven heavens. And then it says, just like He split open, but in Hebrew, kara, just like He tore open the upper spheres, the higher worlds, so too He tore open the lower spheres, and everybody saw that He's Yechidi, that He is the only one. He is the single one. That's the Rashi. Now, let's deal with the technicality for a moment, and then we start getting into the Kabbalah of the Rashi here. Technicality here is, Rashi points out that 35, Rashi says this event happened when God gave us the Torah. The reason why Rashi has to state that, and it's not obvious, is because verse 35 is placed in a very interesting spot. Verse 35 is placed between the discussion of the miracles from Egypt and at Egypt and the story of the giving of the Torah. 35 is exactly in middle, right? If you read, if you read 34, you read 34 says, Or did any God ever miraculously come and take for himself a nation from within a nation through tests, with signs and wonders, and through warfare, and with a strong hand, and with an extended arm, and with great displays, entirely as Hashem your God did for you in Egypt as you watched? In other words, did anybody ever have an experience as Sinai? Okay, and then and that's verse 34. 36 says, from the sky he made audible to you his voice to teach you, and on the earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words from within the fire. So 34 refers to Egypt. 36 refers to Sinai. In the middle, there's a verse 35 that says, you have been shown. So that can be two meanings. It could be, when have I been shown to know? It could be you have been shown to know through the miracles of the Exodus. That's one possibility. But Rashi rejects that possibility. In other words, Rashi says 35 is not following 34. 35 is an introduction to 36. It's not the conclusion of Sinai. It's the beginning of the giving of the Torah. Why is it so important to explain? Because if you say that verse 35 refers to the miracles of the Exodus, then you have been shown to know, what have I seen? I have seen the miracles. I haven't seen God. I have seen the miracles. But if you say that verse 35 refers to the Sinai, so what did I see at Sinai? What did I see at Sinai? There was no miracles at Sinai. I mean, at Sinai, the verse doesn't highlight any extraordinary miracles. What have I seen at Sinai? You have seen Hashem himself. How do you see Hashem himself? So therefore, Rashi has this whole speech that he tore open the heaven. He opened the heavens, and then he tore open the heavens and the upper realms and the lower realms, and then you saw that he was singular. So what does it mean that you saw that God exists and nothing else exists? At Sinai, we experienced the concept that God is Yachid, God is singular. So that's why it's important to clarify that this verse is referring to an introduction to Sinai as opposed to a conclusion of the story of the Exodus, because if it's a conclusion of the story of the Exodus, that just means that in Egypt, we have seen God's miracles. Okay, miracles are nice. We want much more than miracles. We want to see God. Or what does it mean to see God? You can't see God. We want a sense that God is the only existence. That's what we want. In other words, that's a much more spiritual achievement. And that's what Rashi says. Verse 35 is referring to the time when Hashem gave us the Torah. When Hashem gave us the Torah, there were no miracles per se. What was there? It was that experience that we saw, that we sensed that Hashem is Yechidi, Hashem is alone, where all of a sudden we sense that everything else is insignificant in comparison to his essence. Okay, that's the first step of Rashi. Now we get to the fun. Now we get to the action. Okay, so when the Rebbe taught this Rashi, the Rebbe points out something that seems it's hard to pick up upon it, but if you look carefully, you see that Rashi uses two different expressions, and like everything else in the Torah, it's precise, and there's a significant philosophical reason why Rashi uses two terms, and like everything else in Chasidic philosophy, these two distinctions are not just philosophical, but it also has to affect our life, how we live our life, our own perspective, how we serve God. So all the lofty concepts that we're going to discuss must have an actual real world effect in this world. Otherwise, in some sense, we're almost wasting our time. So make sure before we get off the call, we also have a practical interpretation or application of these concepts. Okay, so let's look at Rashi. What does Rashi say as we said? Rashi says, when God gave us the Torah, he opened up the seven heavens. Okay, why does it say seven heavens? All over rabbinic literature, there's 7 levels of the heaven. Whatever that means, we're not going to get into that now. 7 is a complete number. So there's the spiritual domain, and God opens up the spiritual domain. Fine. But now we have a problem. Rashi continues. Just like he tore open the upper spheres, so too he tore open the lower spheres. 1 second. A moment ago, Rashi says he opened the seven heavens. Patach, opening the seven heavens. I have no idea what that means, but it means opening. But now Rashi says immediately after, Rashi says just like he opened he tore the seven sphere, the upper spheres, so too he tore the lower spheres, or he split, or he tore. Now the question becomes, what did God do to the upper sphere? Did God tear it open? I'm sorry, did God open it the way Rashi says in the beginning? Or did God tear it? Tearing and opening means two different things, as we will define. So it seems like Rashi is explaining that in some sense God did both. God both opened the heavens, but he also tore the upper spheres. So he opened and he tore. And now all we have to do is figure out what's open, what's tear, what does it mean in the philosophical sense, and what does it mean in our own service of Hashem. So we'll begin, well, let's make it easy. So we'll start from the practical, and then we go to the philosophical. So in general, there's two ways. Okay, let's just define opening and tearing. When you say you're opening up something, you're not destroying it. To the contrary, you're actually, in some sense, you're actually improving upon it. Something is closed, it cannot really fulfill its full purpose, whatever it's going to be. Your car door is closed, your home is closed, your closet is closed, whatever it means, your book is closed. Closed means that the potential is there, but you're not able to use and fulfill the potential of this item. Opening would mean you're actually you're not harming the book, but you're actually allowing the book to fulfill its potential. So the concept of opening means you're not destroying the item. In fact, you're allowing it to reach its purpose, or you're actually allowing it to complete its mission. You're allowing it to reach its fruition, whatever words you want to use to describe. But it's obviously positive. It's obviously building upon what you already have. That's opening up the heavens, like opening a book. The book is there, it's wonderful, but if it's closed, it can't do its mission, which is to convey knowledge or convey a story. You open the book, it's opened. Now you didn't destroy the book, you opened the book. Now the book can fulfill its purpose. So that's opening. Now, kara, to tear sounds like an element of destruction, right? If I would say I'm going to tear a book, tearing a book is not something that's productive. So what we're trying to say here is God is doing both at Sinai. God is opening up the upper spheres, meaning allowing the upper spheres, the heavens, to fulfill and reveal their true purpose. But he's also tearing both the higher world, upper spheres, and the lower spheres. So tearing sounds like a destructive act. So there's a certain element of positivity, that's opening, and then there's the element of destruction, and that is tearing. And somehow in our service of God, we do and use both. What does that mean? So in general, there's two ways, the way we're supposed to interact with the world around us. Number one is what the Kabbalah calls the idea of refining. In Hebrew, it's birurim. The varer is to refine. So you're refining the concept. What does it mean? It means that there's something in your life, whatever that would mean, any experience, and this experience, while at the surface, it doesn't necessarily seem holy, but if you're going to refine that experience and you're going to use that experience to bring you close to God, what happens, or bring you close to holiness, what happens is, it's not that you destroyed the function of that experience. In fact, you elevated it and you refined it and you revealed its true purpose. So if you have a dollar is not a spiritual experience. But if you take $1 and you give it to charity or you help somebody else and you transcend yourself with this dollar, what happened? You didn't destroy the dollar. You refined the dollar. You show that something that did not seem spiritual, did not seem transcendent, seemed very selfish, but you show how you refine this experience and you allow that experience to become, to refine itself and elevate itself and become something more spiritual, but you did so without destroying the previous function of the dollar. The same thing is for any other experience. A dollar is just an example. But then sometimes that's in general called birurim. You have to refine. There are experiences in your life and there are things in your life. Your job is to refine them. Your job is to elevate them until they themselves, even though they're physical, they themselves will help you move closer to God and bring them closer to God and ultimately bring you closer to God as well. That is the concept of what they call birurim, which is to refine. Then there's another concept. The other concept is called, and again, in our life we have both, but everybody has this in their life as well. It's called, then there's another experience, which is not here we're not here to refine that experience. That experience is here to what Judaism would call a test. It's a nisayon. It's not an experience that we have to refine. It's a test. What does a test mean? So test can mean different things, but in our context, the test is here. The test is portraying something in some way, and your job is to destroy that perspective. Your job is to say that perspective is wrong, and your job is to reject the story that perspective is telling you, right? So in other words, in my life, if you want an example, there are some experiences in my life that even though they're not holy or spiritual, but I can incorporate those into my life, and that will allow me to move myself closer to heaven, move myself closer to God. Whatever that may be, I can eat breakfast, eating that experience could give me energy to study Torah or to help other people. I can go out and see nature. Today I can't watch the sunrise, but I can still go out and see the water, and I can feel the presence of God within nature. In other words, whatever that experience would be, I'm supposed to incorporate everything in my life to help me become a better person. Okay. But then there are certain things in my life that I can't incorporate because for whatever reason, they are a distraction. And if I engage within those things, I'm not going to be able to elevate them. They're going to pull me down. And therefore, my job is to push them away, whatever it may be. If I'm an alcoholic, alcohol is off limits for me. If I have a weakness to some other experience and I realize that I'm not able, for whatever reason, I'm not capable of incorporating that experience, then I have to reject it. And rejecting would mean you have to tear away that experience, tear it up, destroy it. In other words, destroy it. Do not let it have an effect on you. Do not let it be appealing to you. Remember, in the first type of experience, the appealing thing is wonderful because it's enjoyable, it's pleasurable, and that's not a problem because the pleasure enhances your service of God. So you're actually opening up that book, you're opening up that experience, and you're revealing its true identity. And that is the things that you're supposed to incorporate into your life. But then there are things, people, experiences, perspectives, attitudes, feelings, thoughts. Your job is not to incorporate them into your life. Your job is to tear them up. Tear them up means reject them and don't allow them to tell you their story. You have to tear them and see through them. In other words, destroy them and realize that it's just a concealment. So for example, I wake up in the morning and I feel very good about myself. Okay, that's wonderful. Is that something I have to tear, that feeling? No, that's a feeling I have to refine. I have to say, feel good about myself. Okay, what am I going to do with this feeling? Oh, now I'll go out. I'll smile to people. I'll pray to God. I'll be a better person. I'll do something constructive. I'll influence the people around me. Wonderful. That is an elevation of that feeling that I feel so good about myself. Okay. What happens if I wake up in the morning and I have this feeling? And I'm not going to say it never happened. It feels like Menachem, you're nothing. You're a waste of time. You are just about to have a midlife crisis because you did nothing in your life and you're insignificant. And all of the stories that people tell themselves about how terrible they are. Okay. Now, these feelings, that's an example of something. You're not supposed to refine them. You're not supposed to say, I'm going to use this negative feeling and that's going to help me become a better person. Because by the time you try to wrestle with that feeling, to try to refine it, what happens is you may lose the wrestling match. and that feeling may pull you down. And you may tell yourself, I'm so terrible anyway, so I may as well just engage in destructive behavior because I have no hope and no future anyway. So what do I do when I have that experience of feeling that I'm so terrible, as an example? That experience, I cannot engage with it. I cannot refine it. I have to tear it. I have to tear it would mean I have to realize that it's a lie. It's not true. And if it's not true, I don't have to engage with it and elevate it. I have to destroy it. Destroy can mean there are different ways of destroying. Sometimes destroying is by rejecting, and by rejecting just means thinking about something else. But however you deal with it is a separate question. The point is, this experience, you're not supposed to incorporate it within yourself because it's simply a lie. And that we call a test. What does a test mean? A test is that there is a test placed before you, there is a difficulty and a challenge placed before you, but the purpose of this test is not to pass the test in the conventional sense. It's not to refine it. It's not to make you a better person. It's to see whether you can see through the fallacy of this experience and realize that it's wrong and realize that it's false. So in this world, there are things that appear so delicious and so pleasurable, but in reality, they're not pleasurable. In reality, it's going to be destructive in your life. So the test is to see that. The test is to see that the facade, the outside experience that story is telling you is false. You have to tear it up. And now we're going back. So this is the two big ideas. In life in general, you have any experience that comes, I would say any experience, any thought, even any person that crosses your path. You have to ask yourself, how do I deal? Is this somebody that I have to refine? In other words, is this someone that I have to incorporate within my life? Is this someone I have to tolerate and learn from and grow from? Or is this a person or an experience or a thing or an object that I have to actually reject and say, I'm not incorporating you within myself because the story you're telling me, the energy you're giving off, the negativity that you're portraying to me is false. It's not true. It's not real. It's not who I am. And therefore, I'm going to tear you up. That doesn't mean literally, then you may get into trouble with the law. Don't do that before you speak to your lawyer. But what it means is you have no part in my life. The story you're telling me, I'm not falling for your story. I'm tearing up your story. That is, according to the Kabbalah, the two general ways that we interact with the world. Some things we refine and some things we reject. And now, this is in general, you want to talk about in the Torah, there's 248 positive mitzvot and 365 negative mitzvot. And in some sense, what we're saying here is the positive mitzvah is all those experiences that I must and I should incorporate within my life. The negative mitzvah is all those things that I have to reject. So positive mitzvah is the things I refine. Negative mitzvah is the things that are a test and I reject it. So the negative mitzvah says, wow, this experience is so enticing and so beautiful, it's going to make you feel so good. That's a lie. That's a lie. If it's a negative mitzvah, that's a lie. Your job is to tear up that lie. Don't buy that story. And that is the negative mitzvah. And of course, that's the things, positive mitzvah or negative mitzvah. Then most of life is neither positive mitzvah or negative mitzvah. It's neither a positive commandment or a negative commandment. Most of our life is the in-between neutral state. And it's up to us to use it for the good or for the bad. But even within the neutral state, there are things personally that they help me, they bring me up. But certain things that they may be good for you, but for me, they pull me down. And therefore, for me, to tell me that this is such a wonderful experience, no, for me, it's a bad experience, therefore I have to reject it. So that is, in general, the two attitudes toward life, and they're both true, and everybody has a little bit of both. You know, sometimes you want to be a nice person, so somebody comes into your circle, and you say, you know what, nobody's their friend, so I'll be their friend. Then you try to be their friend, and instead they're so negative that not only that you're not having a positive influence upon them, they are actually rubbing off on you, and they're having a negative influence upon you. So now you say, you're trying to be so nice, you're trying to include them, you're trying to incorporate them into your life, but that may not be the path for you. Maybe somebody else can deal with them without being affected by them. But if they're bringing you down, if their negative energy is pulling you down, then you should not try to incorporate them into your circle. In fact, you should say, the story you're telling me, don't say it literally, but I'm just saying what you have to, the service is, why did God send this my path? Why did God send this negative experience, this enticing experience, this powerful experience to cross my path if I'm not supposed to use it? Well, God sent it to you so you can reject it. And if you reject it, in some sense, that's your calling for this experience. So that is refinement versus test. Refinement means you incorporate, test, you push away. And if you try to incorporate something you're supposed to push away, it's not going to be positive. In fact, it will be negative. Okay. So says the Rebbe explains as follows. He says something interesting. He says the difference between the incorporating and rejecting is what Rashi is referring to at Sinai. What have we seen? We've seen God both opening up the heavens, but also tearing up both the heavens and the earth. So this is tricky. So let's start with the heaven and the earth. The heaven God opens and the earth God tears. That's a little bit easier to deal with. So what do you mean when you tell me that God opens the heavens? God opens the heavens means that at Sinai, the heavens have been revealed to us. We see the perspective of the heavens. We see the perspective of spirituality. So why did he open it? Because again, opening is not destruction. Opening is revelation. And the heavens have been revealed to us. We get to see the perspective of the spiritual worlds, and we get to see the perspective and therefore the attitude of the spiritual worlds, and that is that holiness and godliness is meaningful, and the physicality is just fleeting and passing and insignificant. That is something that the heavens tell us. The earth is at least in this context, the earth is the story the earth is telling us. The earth is telling us we are independent, we are self-sufficient, we are nature, there's no God. That story has been torn up at the given of when God gives us the Torah. That story has been rejected. That story has been torn. In other words, the concealment of the lower worlds has been torn. In other words, its spell upon us has been destroyed at the giving of the Torah. Okay, so that's relatively easy. If you're still with me, hang on one more point. We'll get to the complicated part, and then we'll take some questions. The problem is that Rashi also says that just like he tore the upper worlds, so too just like he tore the upper spheres, so too he tore the lower spheres. What's the problem with this phraseology? The problem is that a moment ago Rashi says he opened the heavens. Here he says that the heavens also have been torn. So which one is it? Were the heavens open or were the heavens torn? Okay, so here we're going to have it both ways. On one sense, at Sinai, we get the perspective of the heavens. That holiness is significant, spirituality is significant, and that's opening up the book of heavens. That's opening up the heavens. But the deeper step, that's step number one that Rashi introduces. The deeper step number two, is God also tears the heavens. What does it mean God tears the heavens? God also destroys the perspective of the heavens, not incorporating them, but saying that they don't exist. And why? Why is that? Now we come full circle to what we said in the beginning of the class. When at Sinai, God's essence is revealed. If God's essence is revealed, then Einoid Novada, there's nothing else other than He. Everything else loses significance. Everything else is insignificant. So step number one is at Sinai, we get the perspective of the spiritual worlds. We realize that spirituality is very significant. That's opening up the heavens. The next step is that at Sinai, we realize that the story that the spiritual worlds are telling us, that spirituality is so wonderful, is that itself is not the ultimate truth. That itself has to be torn. That perspective itself has to be torn. Why? Because that perspective itself tells you that there are other things other than God. Maybe they're spiritual experiences, but it's not God's essence. So the deeper perspective of Sinai is that God tears not just the earth, but also heavens. In other words, destroys that perspective. And what do we end up feeling? We end up feeling Ein Oid. There's nothing else other than God, neither heaven nor earth, because both are not the essence of God. So according to this reading, what Rashi is telling us is the two stages that we get at Sinai. Stage number one is we get the perspective of the heavens. We get the perspective, the heavens are opened up to us. We get the perspective of heavens. We understand that spirituality reigns supreme. The next step is even that perspective that gets torn up, meaning even we realize that itself is not the ultimate truth. We have to obliterate that perspective as well. What's the ultimate? We don't have to. That's what happened to us. It was been shown to us at Sinai. And what's the true experience? What's the ultimate experience? The ultimate experience is that nothing else exists because everything else is completely and utterly insignificant compared to God. So again, disclaimer, we're not saying it doesn't exist. We're saying it does exist, but we're saying if you felt the full presence of God, then we would feel everything else, not just the lower worlds, but also the higher worlds. We would feel them as completely insignificant, as torn up. The concealment, the fact that they appear as something independent, is torn up and destroyed. Okay, that's the story in short. The good news is that I warned you that this is going to be esoteric. So if you